In the 3rd century BC, the world was holding its breath. One power was destined to rule it all: the Roman Republic. A young, brutal, and ascendant state was spreading its shadow across the Mediterranean. Its legions were an unstoppable force, a machine of iron and discipline that had crushed every opponent. Rome saw itself as the center of the universe, destined for eternal glory. But in the halls of its Senate and in the whispers of its marketplaces, one name would soon be spoken with a unique blend of awe and pure, unadulterated terror. That name was not a king or an emperor. It was a man. Hannibal. Hannibal Barca. For nearly 2 decades, this single man would become Rome's bogeyman. He was the monster they told their children about, the strategic phantom they could not catch, the military genius who would inflict upon them their darkest, most humiliating day. He would march an army of elephants over the impossible peaks of the Alps. He would lay traps that annihilated entire consular armies, and he would bring the Republic to its very knees. But this was not just a war for territory. It was not just politics. For Hannibal, this was personal. To understand the man who terrified Rome, we must go back to the Oath. The year is 237 BC. The First Punic War has just ended. Hannibal's father, Hannibal Barca, a brilliant general for the rival power of Carthage, has been defeated. Carthage, a naval and trading empire based in North Africa, has been humiliated. Rome has ripped away its most prized possessions, the wealthy islands of Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. The peace treaty is a crushing blow, instilling a deep and bitter resentment in the Carthaginian nobility. And nowhere was this resentment hotter than in the heart of Hamilcar. Legend tells us of a 9-year-old boy standing before a sacrificial altar. His father, Hamilcar, places the boy's hand upon the sacrifice and makes him swear a solemn blood oath to forever be an enemy of Rome, to never be a friend to the Roman people. That boy was Hannibal. This oath would define his entire existence. It was not a childish promise, it was a sacred mission. While Roman boys were learning rhetoric and law, Hannibal was learning logistics, strategy, and hatred. He was raised in his father's army camps in Iberia, modern-day Spain, a new territory Carthage was conquering to replace its lost islands. He learned to sleep on the hard ground, to endure cold and heat, and to command men from a dozen different tribes who spoke a dozen different languages. When his father died and his brother-in-law was assassinated, the army, by unanimous acclaim, chose the 26-year-old Hannibal as its commander-in-chief. Rome paid little attention. They saw a distant provincial governor, a problem for another day. They had no idea that the small boy who swore an oath at the altar had now grown into the man who would come to fulfill it. The spark was about to be lit, and it would set the world on fire. Hannibal's first move was to test Rome's boundaries, culminating in the siege of Saguntum, a Roman ally. Rome, outraged, demanded Carthage hand him over. Carthage refused. The Second Punic War was on.
But Hannibal would not fight the war Rome expected. He would not fight them on the seas they now controlled. He would not wait for them in Spain or defend Carthage in Africa. He would do the one thing no one, not in their wildest nightmares, believed was possible. He was going to take the war to them. He was going to march on Italy.
Rome knew Hannibal was a threat. They weren't fools. They prepared two massive armies. One, led by the consul Publius Cornelius Scipio, the father of Hannibal's future rival, was sent to Spain to intercept him. The other was sent to Sicily, preparing to invade Africa itself. The Roman plan was simple: keep the war far from home. They had completely misjudged their enemy. Hannibal's plan was not just bold, it was insane. He would march his army, an unwieldy multinational force of 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants, overland. He would cross the treacherous Pyrenees Mountains, cut across the hostile territory of southern Gaul, and then he would cross the Alps. Let us be clear, no army in history had ever crossed the Alps. It was September. Winter was coming. The passes were controlled by fierce Gallic tribes who lived for plunder. The paths were narrow, covered in ice and prone to landslides. To the Roman mind, it was a physical impossibility. It was a 1,000-mile gamble with death. For Hannibal, it was the only way. The march began. The first obstacle was the Rhone River. The Gauls were waiting on the far bank. Hannibal's genius was immediately clear. He sent a detachment under his brother, Mago, to cross upstream under cover of darkness. As the main army began its noisy, chaotic crossing, distracting the Gauls, Mago's force slammed into their rear. The Gauls were routed. The army, including the elephants ferried on massive earth-covered rafts, was across. But then came the mountains. What followed was not a march. It was a 15-day descent into hell. The cold was a living enemy, a biting wind that stole the breath and froze men in their tracks. The narrow ledges were treacherous. Men and baggage animals slipped, plunging thousands of feet into the icy ravines below. The massive elephants, terrified and unstable, struggled to find footing, creating bottlenecks of panic. And then the tribes attacked. The Allobroges, a mountain tribe, rained boulders down from the cliffs, crushing men and animals. They ambushed the baggage train, stealing vital supplies. Hannibal was forced to split his column, fighting desperate, bloody rearguard actions on paths barely wide enough for 2 men. One account tells of a landslide that blocked the path completely. The army was trapped. Hannibal's engineers, using the only tools they had, set massive bonfires against the rock face, and then, in a feat of ancient engineering, doused the superheated rock with sour wine or vinegar. The rock cracked and shattered from the thermal shock. His men, starving and frostbitten, desperately chipped away a new path. For 15 days, they fought the cold, they fought starvation, and they fought the mountains themselves. When Hannibal finally emerged from the snow-covered passes into the Po Valley of northern Italy, he looked upon a shattered force. He had started the Alps crossing with perhaps 40,000 men. He arrived with only 26,000. Almost half his army was gone. Thousands lay dead in the ice-choked chasms behind him. Of his 37 elephants, only a handful remained. A Roman general would have seen this as a catastrophic failure, a prelude to surrender. Hannibal saw it as a victory. He had done the impossible. He was in Italy, and his surviving army was not a collection of mercenaries. It was a hardened core of veterans, forged in the ice and fire of the Alps, loyal not to Carthage, but to him. The Roman consul Scipio, who had been waiting for him in Spain, rushed back to Italy in disbelief. The Senate was in shock. The Phantom had bypassed all their defenses. The war had come home. The Romans were arrogant. They saw Hannibal's depleted army wearied from the Alps and saw a quick, glorious victory. This arrogance was the first weapon Hannibal would use against them. His first test came at the Battle of the Ticinus, a small cavalry skirmish. But it was here that Hannibal's superior Numidian cavalry, the finest light horsemen in the world, dominated the stiffer, less flexible Roman cavalry. The consul Scipio was himself gravely wounded and barely saved by his teenage son, also named Scipio. It was a small fight, but it sent a shockwave. Hannibal's cavalry was superior. The main Roman army, now combined under consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus, met Hannibal at the Trebia River. It was a cold December morning. Sempronius was impetuous, eager to win a triumph before his term as consul ended. Hannibal knew his man. The first trap was set. Before dawn, Hannibal sent his Numidian cavalry to harass the Roman camp, taunting them. As he predicted, Sempronius, enraged, ordered his entire army to give chase immediately. The Romans charged. They didn't stop for breakfast. They didn't stop to put on their warmest cloaks. They plunged en masse into the icy, chest-high waters of the Trebia River. When they emerged on the other side, they were half frozen, soaked to the bone, and starving. And there, waiting for them, was Hannibal's army, well-fed, dry, and in perfect formation. But the real trap was yet to be sprung. The night before, Hannibal had taken his brother Mago and 2,000 elite troops, a mix of cavalry and infantry, and hidden them in a drainage ditch overgrown with reeds far on the Roman flank. They had lain there all night, freezing, waiting. The battle raged. The Roman infantry, tough as ever, began to push back Hannibal's center. Sempronius thought he was winning. And then Hannibal gave the signal. Mago's 2,000 hidden troops burst from their concealment and smashed into the rear of the Roman legions. It was a perfect trap. Hit from the front, hammered by elephants on the flanks, and now stabbed in the back, the Roman army disintegrated. It was not a battle, it was a massacre. Of the 40,000 Romans who crossed the river, less than 10,000 made it back to their camp. The rest were cut down or drowned.
Rome was staggered. They had lost a consular army. But surely this was a fluke, a trick. Hannibal marched south into Etruria. The new consul, Gaius Flaminius, raised another army and raced to intercept him. Flaminius was another impetuous, arrogant politician, and Hannibal read him like a book. He marched past Flaminius, openly daring him to follow, goading him by burning the Tuscan countryside. Flaminius took the bait. Hannibal found the perfect location, a long, narrow valley bordering the waters of Lake Trasimene, with a single thin road running beside the shore. The hills on the other side of the road were covered in fog. The second trap was set. All night, Hannibal positioned his army. He placed his best troops at the far end of the valley, blocking the exit. He hid his light infantry and Gallic allies in the wooded slopes of the hills directly above the road. He hid his cavalry at the entrance, ready to close the trap. The next morning, the Roman army marched into the valley. The fog off the lake was thick, mixing with the morning mist. The Romans couldn't see the hills above them. They marched in a single long column, blind, deaf, and stupid. They marched, legion after legion, deeper into the valley. They had no idea they were marching into a perfectly prepared killing box.
The trumpets sounded. From the hills, tens of thousands of Gauls and Carthaginians screamed and charged down, slamming into the long, exposed Roman flank. The cavalry, hidden at the entrance, charged in, cutting off the retreat. The Roman army was trapped between the lake and the hills. They hadn't even had time to form a battle line. They were butchered in their marching order. Thousands were driven into the lake, their heavy armor pulling them down to drown. They were cut down by the hundreds. The Battle of Lake Trasimene was not a battle. It was perhaps the largest and most successful ambush in military history. In 3 hours, 25,000 Romans were killed, including the consul Flaminius. Another 5,000 were captured. Hannibal lost only 1,500 men. When the news reached Rome, the praetor famously went to the forum and announced with 2 words, "Pugna magna victi sumus." We have been defeated in a great battle. Panic gripped the city. The boogeyman was at the gates. The psychological terror was overwhelming. Hannibal had, in just a few months, completely outmaneuvered and outfought the Roman war machine. Not once, but 3 times. His genius for strategy was unlike anything they had ever faced. And if you appreciate this level of deep dive into military history and grand strategy, take a brief moment to subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to bringing these epic stories to life, and your support allows us to tell them. Now, back to the crisis in Rome. Rome was on the verge of total collapse. In their terror, they resorted to an ancient emergency measure. They appointed a dictator, one man with absolute power. His name was Quintus Fabius Maximus. Fabius was the complete opposite of the consuls Hannibal had just destroyed. He was old, patient, and wise. He looked at Hannibal's army and understood a terrifying truth. In a pitched battle, Rome could not win.
So Fabius invented a new strategy, one that would earn him the mocking nickname Cunctator, the delayer. We call it the Fabian strategy. He refused to fight Hannibal. For months, Fabius shadowed Hannibal's army, sticking to the hills, cutting off his supplies, harassing his foragers. He would not, under any circumstances, be drawn into a battle. He was waging a war of attrition, letting Hannibal's army wither on the vine, far from home. It was a brilliant strategy, and the Roman people hated it. They saw it as cowardly, as un-Roman. Hannibal marched through Italy, burning farms and towns unopposed, and Fabius just watched. The pressure mounted. The moment Fabius's term as dictator expired, the people flocked to elect new consuls who promised one thing: to stop running, to meet Hannibal, and to crush him with the full power of Rome. They elected Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus, and they gave them an army, not just a consular army, the largest army the Roman Republic had ever assembled. 8 full legions, an unprecedented force of over 86,000 men. This was it. This was the final battle. Rome was putting its entire future on a single throw of the dice. Hannibal, his army now worn down to 50,000 men, was waiting for them on a wide, treeless plain near a small town called Cannae. He had chosen this ground. It was perfect for his one decisive advantage: his cavalry. The 2 consuls commanded on alternating days. Varro, the impetuous one, was in command on August 2nd, 216 BC. He saw Hannibal's smaller army, and he saw his own massive numerical advantage. He ordered his legions to pack in, shoulder to shoulder, in a deep, dense formation designed to punch through the enemy's center like a battering ram. It was exactly what Hannibal wanted him to do. The greatest trap in military history was now set. Hannibal's formation was a work of pure genius. In the center, he placed his weakest troops, his Spanish and Gallic infantry. He pushed them forward in a thin, convex crescent, a U-shape bulging out towards the Romans. On the flanks, hidden behind the center, he placed his most elite, battle-hardened troops, his African infantry, trained in Roman equipment. And on the extreme wings, he massed his superior Carthaginian and Numidian cavalry.
The battle began. The 86,000 Romans, a tidal wave of steel, crashed into Hannibal's weak center. As Hannibal had planned, his Spanish and Gallic troops fought bravely, but began to give way. The bulging crescent U was slowly pushed back, and back, and back, until it had inverted, becoming a U-shape facing inward. The Roman legions, smelling victory, roared and pushed deeper. They surged forward into the sagging pocket, their dense formation becoming even more compressed as they funneled into the trap. Varro thought he was breaking Hannibal's line. In reality, he was marching his entire army into a giant bag. Step 1. On the flanks, Hannibal's cavalry, led by his general Hasdrubal, shattered the weaker Roman cavalry
and charged off the field. Step 2. The Roman legions, still pushing, were now packed so tightly they could barely lift their arms to swing their swords. They were a mob, not an army. Step 3. Now Hannibal gave the signal. The elite African infantry, who had been held in reserve on the flanks, had been watching the Romans surge past them. Now they turned inward. They slammed into the exposed flanks of the Roman legions. The Romans were hit from the left and from the right. At that exact moment, Hannibal's victorious cavalry returned. They had circled around the battle and now smashed into the rear of the Roman army.
The trap was closed. The Roman army was surrounded on all 4 sides. 86,000 men packed into a field of death with no escape. What followed was not a battle. It was an industrial-scale extermination. The slaughter went on for 8 hours. The sources say the blood ran so deep it slicked the fields. The consul Paulus was killed. 80 Roman senators, a quarter of the Senate, were slaughtered. By sunset, between 50,000 and 70,000 Roman soldiers lay dead or dying on the plain of Cannae. It was, and still is, the single darkest day in Roman military history. Hannibal had lost 6,000 men. He had destroyed an army nearly twice his size. He had achieved the impossible, the perfect battle. In Hannibal's camp, there was euphoria. His cavalry commander Hannibal turned to him, ecstatic. "General," he said, "in 5 days you will dine in triumph in Rome. March now. Follow me with the cavalry, and they will know we have arrived before they know we are coming." Hannibal hesitated. He looked at his exhausted army. He looked at the 500 miles between him and the capital. He looked at the massive fortified Servian walls of Rome. And he said, "No." Hannibal, in disbelief, famously replied, "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal. You do not know how to use one." And so we are left with the great enigma, the question that has haunted historians for 2 millennia. Why did Hannibal not march on Rome? The answer is complex, and it reveals the true nature of his grand strategy. Hannibal, the soldier, was wrong. Hannibal, the strategist, was right. First, the practical. Hannibal had no siege equipment. His army was a field army, designed for maneuver, not for grinding year-long sieges against one of the most fortified cities in the world. He had just lost 6,000 of his best men. His army was exhausted, wounded, and far from its supply base. A direct assault would have failed, shattering his aura of invincibility. Second, and more importantly, destroying the city of Rome was never his primary goal. Hannibal was not a barbarian warlord bent on sheer destruction. He was a Carthaginian aristocrat. His strategy was political. Rome's power did not come from the city alone. It came from its federation, the web of allied Italian city-states that provided it with endless manpower.
the 86,000 men at Cannae. Most weren't even Roman. They were allies. Hannibal's plan was to break that federation. He believed that by proving Rome was beatable, by annihilating its armies in the field, he could convince these allies, Capua, Tarentum, Syracuse, to abandon Rome and join him. Cannae was meant to be the final bloody argument. And in this, he was partially successful. After the battle, the great city of Capua, the second largest in Italy, defected to his side. Syracuse in Sicily revolted. Tarentum joined him. The entire south of Italy was in his grasp. He didn't need to march on Rome because he believed Rome, cut off from its allies, would be forced to sue for peace. But he had made one fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated the Romans. He had broken their armies, but he had not broken their will.
Rome was broken, but it did not shatter. When the news of Cannae arrived, the city was plunged into absolute terror. But the Senate, in its finest hour, refused to panic. They refused to hear the word peace. They forbade public mourning. They immediately began raising new legions, recruiting from underage boys, and even arming slaves. Hannibal had shown them how to lose. Now, they would show him how they could endure. For the next 13 years, Hannibal remained in Italy, a master of a war he could not win. He was the undefeated general, marching at will, but he was trapped. The Fabian strategy was back. The Romans, led by a new generation of commanders, shadowed him, refused battle, and slowly, one by one, reconquered the cities that had defected to him. And while Hannibal was in Italy, a new Roman hero was rising. His name was Publius Cornelius Scipio, the same young man who had saved his father at the Ticinus. He had watched Hannibal. He had studied his traps, his tactics, his use of cavalry. He learned from his enemy. While Hannibal was in Italy, Scipio took the war to Spain, conquering Carthage's most valuable territory. He applied Hannibal's own flanking tactics to defeat Carthaginian armies there. And then he proposed a plan so audacious it mirrored Hannibal's own. "We must fight Hannibal not in Italy," he argued to a terrified Senate. "We must fight him in Africa." In 204 BC, Scipio landed a Roman army on the shores of North Africa. The Carthaginian Senate, in a panic, did the one thing they had to do. They recalled their greatest general. After 15 years in Italy, undefeated, Hannibal was forced to abandon his life's work and sail home to defend his city. The two greatest generals of the age were finally on a collision course. The final showdown came in 202 BC on the plains of Zama. It was a mirror image of Cannae. This time, Scipio had the superior cavalry, having allied with the Numidian king Massinissa. Hannibal was forced to rely on raw, untested recruits and 80 war elephants. He charged his elephants, but Scipio had studied. He had trained his army to, upon signal, blow massive trumpets and open up wide lanes in his formation. The terrified elephants
funneled into these empty corridors, ran harmlessly through the Roman lines, or worse, panicked and turned back, crashing into Hannibal's own troops. The infantry lines clashed. The battle hung in the balance. But then, just as Hannibal's cavalry had done at Cannae, Scipio's victorious Roman and Numidian cavalry returned from their chase and smashed into the rear of Hannibal's army. Scipio had beaten the master at his own game. It was Hannibal's first and last great defeat. He rode from the battlefield, acknowledging he had lost not just the battle, but the war. Carthage sued for peace. The Second Punic War was over. Rome was the undisputed master of the Mediterranean.
Hannibal's war was over, but Rome's fear of him was not. He tried to rebuild Carthage as a statesman, enacting political reforms to pay the crushing war debt to Rome. But his reforms made him enemies at home, and Rome, paranoid, demanded he be handed over. Hannibal fled into exile. For the last 20 years of his life, he was a man without a country. He wandered the eastern Mediterranean, a ghost at the courts of foreign kings, still trying to build a coalition, still trying to ignite one last war against the enemy that had defined his life. But Rome's power was now absolute. They hunted him relentlessly. Finally, in 183 BC, old and cornered by Roman agents in Bithynia, Hannibal saw that there was no escape. He had lived as Rome's greatest enemy, and he would not die as their prisoner. He produced a vial of poison he had reportedly carried with him for years. His final words were said to be, "Let us now relieve the Romans of their great anxiety, since they have not the patience to wait for an old man's death." He died, undefeated in battle on Roman soil. What then is his legacy? Hannibal failed. He did not destroy Rome. He did not save Carthage, which Rome would utterly annihilate 50 years later, sowing its fields with salt. But in his failure, Hannibal, more than any other man, created the Roman Empire. He took a republic, and through 15 years of terror, he forged it into a hardened militaristic superpower. The fear of Hannibal, the Hannibanistic terror, never left the Roman psyche. It was this fear that justified their expansion, their professionalized legions, and their policy of total, unforgiving warfare. Hannibal brought Rome to its knees, but when it stood back up, it was strong enough to conquer the world. He remains, to this day, the ultimate rival, the strategic mastermind, and the man who, for one terrifying moment in history, held the fate of the Western world in the palm of his hand.
But the question remains, what do you think was Hannibal's greatest mistake? Was it not marching on Rome after Cannae? Or was his quest doomed from the start against an enemy as resilient as Rome? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always, thank you for watching.